Yeah, so I am a research fellow at the Center for Legal Policy. I work in the Justice Access and Lowering Delays in India initiative, which is Jaldi initiative, to which we essentially do JR work. During the course of our work, we pick up different issues that the judiciary faces currently. Uh, Issues such as like diversity, infrastructure, sometimes open data. Virtual courts, like whatever it is, and we research on those and sometimes come up with solutions for those issues. This project, Taika, do you want to start sharing? Yeah. So, through this project in particular, we wanted to understand the Supreme Court's case flow during the COVID-19 pandemic. This was essentially done at the very beginning of the pandemic, which seems years back, but it was just like in March 2020 that the Supreme Court gave directions that all hearings would be virtual. So, since the order was passed in March, so we decided to analyze April 2020. Next slide. So essentially, like judicial systems across the world responded differently to the pandemic. Like some shut down completely. I think Dubai courts were the one which completely shut down. Others had limited, limited cases going through them, and while others had limited in-person litigation as well. The Supreme Court of India decided to utilize the digital infrastructure created under the eCourts project and mandated virtual hearings of urgent matters through video conferencing. Now, this was done through a circular published on 26 March 2020. Through this project, we essentially wanted to understand the impact of mandatory virtual hearings and listing of urgent matters and how that affected the workload of the Supreme Court. We thought this was extremely necessary because from what we can see, the legal community is more or less moving towards virtual courts as part of its future. And even if not completely, at the very least, after the pandemic even ends, we might have a hybrid system in place. So we thought we needed to understand the extent to which virtual courts can be operational in the country, and also the areas in which probably they need some improvement, right? And again, we wanted to see what exactly are these urgent matters that the court is hearing. To just give uh, an insight into the methodology that we followed, we did firstly we analyzed the cases that were listed in April 2020. We also did a comparative analysis with the cases listed in April 2019. Now, April 2020, the cause lists were quite small and manageable, so we manually went through the cause list and extracted the data. If for April 29, we obviously had the data scraped. And then further, this data was segregated into under the following date of listing, case type, stage, bench dealing with the case, number of actual cases, and connected matters. Cases before the court, from what we saw overall, were broadly classified into civil and criminal cases. A third category that we came across was diary cases. Now, diary cases are the cases which still have certain, like but there are defects that are yet to be identified by the registry or like even fixed by the advocate. So those are listed as diary cases. With cases like that, we went into track down the case and recording the categorization that would be assigned to these diary cases once admitted. So those are also classified under civil and criminal cases for the purpose of our study. To give us overview of the data set. Um, Again, cases before the Supreme Court are listed under a regular list or a miscellaneous list. Regular matters are those matters which have been admitted for hearing. So, like a day-to-day hearing or whatever, like where dates are being given for that case, all those cases are deemed regular cases. Almost everything else comes under the miscellaneous cases. category. For April 2020, the total number of working days for the court were 14 days. The total number of miscellaneous cause lists that we found were again 14, and miscellaneous supplementary cause lists was 6. For April 2019, sorry, just on. Yeah, for April 2019, the total number of working days were 90. Miscellaneous main cause list again 90. Miscellaneous supplementary cause list also 90. Regular main cause list were 8, and regular supplementary cause list were 5. So during the course of the pandemic, like because the court was only hearing urgent matters, there was no regular cause list for April 2020. Yeah, to take us further into the data set itself and our observations from the same, I would like Tarika will take it from here.
Shreya, just one question. Some of our audience might not be very clear with like what is the difference between these different cause lists or like supplementary cause lists. If you could just explain that a little bit, that would be useful.
So, like I said, regular and miscellaneous I explained. Regular cases are those which are being listed on like there are hearings happening already. Miscellaneous is almost everything else. Now, the main cause list is essentially a cause list that has been pre-planned for that day. So, like maybe like in the morning or like previous day. And supplementary cause lists are the ones that are being listed at the last minute because of some sort of request by an advocate or some sort of urgency that has come up in the matter, right? So the advocate comes before the court asking for a date on the same day. So that's when a supplementary cause list is made.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay, Tarika, you want to take it from?
Hello. Can you hear me? All right. Thanks, Shreya. So as Shreya already pointed out, the purpose for this study was less to find the answers, but more to ask questions about how the litigation landscape changed before the Supreme Court in the initial days of the pandemic and the initial days of virtual hearings. So in that regard, from this data, we made 5 observations that I'm going to share with you just now, which lead us to ask some questions which could be interesting for future research. So the first observation that we made was that during this period, the criminal litigation seemed to have shot up in the Supreme Court as compared to the civil litigation in the previous year. So to evidence this, we look at the data. As we can see from these graphs, in 2020 April, the diary cases constituted the largest share of cases before the Supreme Court, followed by criminal and civil cases. In comparison, in April 2019, the civil cases, followed by diary cases, followed by criminal cases, was the proportion of cases listed before the Supreme Court in April. However, this data is meaningless because we don't know whether diary cases were civil or criminal. So as Shreya already mentioned, we deep dived and bifurcated these diary cases into civil and criminal based on what we found on opening those cases. And we found that civil cases continued to be the largest share in 2020. However, the ratio by which they were the largest share had changed. So while civil cases constituted 58% of all the cases before the Supreme Court in April 2020, there was a 13% drop compared to the last year. Whereas in criminal cases, there was an increase of 12% in April 2020 compared to April 2019. Further, if we look at the case types of which were listed before the Supreme Court, we see that SLPs were the largest share of cases before the Supreme Court in April 2020. However, the civil SLPs had dropped by a drastic 36% compared to 2019, whereas criminal SLPs had increased by about 6% in 2020. So even when we spoke to lawyers practicing in the Supreme Court, there was a perceptible conclusion that criminal cases are being heard more as urgent cases before the Supreme Court. So now this leads us to question why the criminal cases are considered more urgent compared to civil cases. Some of the obvious explanations that we could think of back then was that there is a push for bail applications due to the fear of transmission in prisons. And secondly, litigants are finding it difficult to approach the district cases and district courts and high courts for their trials, and hence they're approaching the Supreme Court directly for a more expeditious hearing of their matters. The second and the third observation that we made from this data was that of all the diary cases, 60% of all the diary cases were civil writ petitions. As some of you might already know, civil writ petitions are basically actions initiated by citizens against state actions. So that leads us to question what was happening during this time that compelled citizens to move against the government uh, in larger numbers compared to previous years during this time. Um, Secondly, we see that compared to 2019, where only 0.03% of all cases were suo motu petitions by the Supreme Court, in April 2020, 1.4% of the cases that were listed before the Supreme Court were suo motu actions. Suo motu actions are basically petitions that are introduced by the Supreme Court on its own volition to intervene in existing circumstances. So it goes to show that the Supreme Court was proactively intervening to maintain law and order in public affairs. The fourth observation that we made was that compared to previous year, where 0.4% of the listed matters were only at the judgment stage, in 2020, 16% of the cases that were listed before the Supreme Court were at the judgment stage, which makes us wonder whether the fact that the judges were not coming to court in person gave them the more time, gave them the necessary time to write down the lengthy reasoned orders and pronounce more judgments compared to previous year. Finally, we see that there is a large disparity in the number of cases listed before different judges. While some judges have 102 and 95 and 66 cases listed before them, others have 4 or 2, and that too, if I remember correctly, simply at the judgment stage. So it makes us wonder why is this caseload being um, spread across different judges in this disproportionate manner? Is it because of the way the roster is designed? Is it because some judges are more technologically comfortable to hear cases through virtual hearings? So, what is it that is driving these numbers to be spread out in this way? So, these were some of the observations that we made and the questions that we could think of from this data set.
So as Tarika said, this exercise essentially gave us a lot more questions than answers, and one of the reasons for that is this was like the analysis data set was fairly small. It is just 2 months, so these are essentially some of the questions or avenues for further research that we think truly are worth exploring. And I would take this platform to actually invite people, if interested. We would love to collaborate and work on these things, because although like we have some level of expertise in this, when it comes to larger data sets or when it comes to certain technical aspects of it, we need some help as well. So yeah, one of the things we thought that could be done was essentially like extend the 1 month study to a whole year study and essentially see the kind of cases that Supreme Court heard. While we got a overall sense of what kind of cases were urgent for the Supreme Court, we don't really know if that is what continued to happen through the year, or was it like specific to that 1 month, right? Another thing is the Supreme Court directed all three tiers of the judiciary to go into virtual hearing modes, right? So we don't know how urgent matters were interpreted by, say, the high courts, low courts, or even like within different high courts, or like even low courts within one state, right? We don't really have data currently to know how they interpreted it. And then finally, of course, as we were saying, like more or less, we will be moving into a hybrid courtroom structure as the pandemic has shown. So a deep dive into the technology integration with different courts is something that we think is worth exploring. So yeah, with that, we are done, and would like thank you so much for listening to us. And if there are whatever questions, we can go into the discussion.
Thank you so much, Shreya and Tarika. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask it right now, and Shreya and Tarika would be happy to answer them. Yeah, I can see a hand from DJ Tejas. Yeah, can you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, hello. I just wanted to know, did you guys run any mathematical or statistic tests on the data sets you took for the data analysis?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
Shreya.
we did basic analysis that we know on Excel essentially, and with like especially for the data that was scraped for April 2019, we already got like a cleaner form of the data because we had like a person who has expertise to work with data, and he joined us and like he helped us with scraping the data. So yeah.
Right, thank you.
Please feel free to unmute yourself, or if you want to use the chat box here, please put your question there as well. While the audience asks the question, I have a question for you, Shreya and Tarika both. What are so when someone gets access to like a caseload data, so one is, how difficult it is to get hold of this data. And one is the data analysis that you have done. Apart from that, what are the other angles or other stories that one should like look for in this data? What can it really reveal about the way something is functioning?
Yeah, Tarika, do you want to take it?
Yeah. So getting hold of judicial data has been a pet peeve for us because it's just been a struggle to get the official data from the courts or Department of Justice. So what we generally do is we have Satishwar doing the data scraping for us generally. And even then, when we're doing this automated coding to get the data from e-courts platforms or high court websites, it's not been an easy ride because um, getting the data requires it to be maintained in a certain format. It requires the data to be scraped using a code. But because of the way that courts maintain data, there is no standardization. Different courts have different practices. The nomenclatures are different. Sometimes there are clerical errors, there are grammatical errors, which make it very difficult to do an automated scraping of the data. And we have to manually sit and clean each and every entry and verify each and every entry, which takes weeks of painful work. So getting hand of this pendency and caseload data is very difficult. Cleaning it is even worse. And when it comes to analysis, as Shreya and I are both lawyers, we generally take the help of statisticians to get the numbers right. But I think it requires a certain amount of experience to understand what are the facts that are driving these numbers, what are the reasons driving these numbers. So it's it's a process in itself.
Yeah, and with like this project in particular, so essentially we were taking out cause list and scraping information off cause list to see like what are the case types and things like that. And it was just Supreme Court, right? What we were informed is that different courtrooms inside the Supreme Court might not be maintaining data in the same form. Like your so the format of the cause list itself is not even uniform across courts, and they also sometimes get judges names wrong. So essentially it's that because multiple people are sitting and entering data, and so then that leads to different formats. So like this standardization has been like an issue. And another thing that happened actually during when we were scraping data for the Supreme Court was that they changed the captcha format. So while the code had been written for a certain captcha format, that thing changed halfway through, so we had to redo the whole process because like the code writing had to be redone. So these are like uh, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Please unmute yourself.
So, sorry, sir, please complete your statement. And
No,
then
no,
I can.
that's just it. Like they changed the captcha format. So again, we had to redo the process of even the code writing. So, and this is not something we have only faced with the Supreme Court. This has happened on another report that we were working on much like recently. And the same thing happened in a particular high court. And then, I mean, their system changed so much that our data scraper was essentially sitting and manually entering captcha for the last 6,000 odd cases. So, it's a struggle to get any form of data from like courts. But
I can understand. And so thanks a lot for sharing the presentation with all of us. So I'm not a lawyer, so why this answer? A question popped in my head when I was listening to you in terms of okay, now you have done this exercise for 2020, and now we are in the middle of the pandemic, and hopefully there will be more waves. We don't know about any of this. Now, if we have to continue some of this work, and maybe people from the community would like to help you in doing some of this because this is so challenging to get the data in the first place. Do you think that we can, or maybe you during this process, if you able to create, if you created some resources that can be used, let's say for by the volunteers to do this exercise for other years or for other geography. Let's say this is just for the Supreme Court. Maybe someone wants to do it for a High Court. So in this case, how can the community help you? I just would like to understand this from if you have any ideas about it. Thank you.
yeah, so like that was the last slide. Like that is what I was trying to like. Those are actually different questions that potentially can be answered in further research. As far as like I said, we do take this platform to invite people who would want to collaborate, because uh, what we did is, again, it's only for a month, and as you rightly said, a whole year has passed since then. So we don't know if like the trend that we saw in April 2020 has continued, or if it has like completely changed, right? So how, like, the kind of help we need will be again with like data scraping and handling large data sets. Like, we kind of, the observations, I believe that the observations we had in this particular report can be used as starting points for like any sort of research questions that we need, right? Like, we already know, like, in April 2020 this happened. Is this replicated throughout the year is what we need to know, or has it changed completely? So yeah, that's why like it's with the data essentially that we need some help, because again, there are time constraints, there are resources constraints, and yeah.
And
Do you
to
want to
like add on to what Shreya said, looking at judicial reforms at a macro level, as you rightly said, it is something that has to be tackled by the community. It is not something that can be tackled by lawyers alone. It is not something that can be tackled by data scientists alone. So, like platforms like Justice Hub are like excellent forums for uh, data scientists, lawyers, policy experts, engineers, everybody to come together, statisticians to come together and think about these questions. Because um, as you said, volunteers can help to collect this data, scrape this data. Lawyers can, with different um, experience, can come together and help to analyze this data. So it's something that requires the community action as a whole.
Yeah, I think like that. Yeah, I think like collective is the way to go on these things. Devika, I see your hand up. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thank you. Thanks, Tarika and Shreya. I think this was a great presentation. And I'm a lawyer who's recently studying public policy. And I think that we have, unfortunately, very few lawyers who really understand how to work with data. My question is that, can you tell me something about how judges are assigned cases in the Supreme Court? Because one of your observations was that different judges have different caseloads, and you attributed it to capacity constraints. So my question is that can judges select how many cases they want to hear, or is it something that is randomly assigned to them? Thanks.
Thanks, Devika. So yeah, I completely understand how it is to be a lawyer working in public policy. But To answer your question, the workings of the Supreme Court are like
Oh, sorry.
a,
Could you repeat? But I was completely lost. I got dropped off. Okay, what was the question?
her question is
Like,
about how roster allocation happens in the Supreme Court. Like, can judges decide what matter to hear and how many matters to hear? So, the Supreme Court's functioning is pretty much like a black box. We don't know what happens behind those doors. And as with any other court, the master of the roster is the Chief Justice. Um, and so, yeah, there is no objective or scientific or uh, transparent way in which the roster allocation happens. There is no clear cut public information as to who gets to listen to how many cases and why. That's something that just is decided internally within the court.
yeah, I mean, there might be something. It's just that we don't know it. I mean, I think there must be some logic that they will be following, but it's not out in the public as to how they do it.
There are even case laws which say that it's entirely up to the discretion of the head justice, like the head judge.
Thanks. Thanks, Tarika. I think the reason why I was asking was because this observation was quite interesting. One could argue that the judges were not assigned the data that you saw. Some judges were given a different caseload, so it might not really be attributable to capacity constraints of the judges, but the fact that they were not assigned as many cases in the first place.
Yeah, of course, it can be that as well. Like, again, we don't know what exactly is the reason. It's probably how the roster was allocated. It's probably because some judges have the technical know-how to do it better than others. It's maybe like we don't know what exactly the reason is.
To answer that, we would probably have to look at a longer period of case of data to understand what judge has the habit, like has the practice of listening to certain types of cases, then link it to this particular period and see what are the trends. So that requires a deeper, a wider data set and a deeper analysis, and probably running some regressions for getting that causality right. Like, is it because of certain expertise, certain rosters, certain trends that we see this happening? So yeah, this was not covered in the scope of this particular study, but it's an interesting question.
Just extending the line of thought here, what are some of the popular hypotheses that people who are working on quantitative side of like legal analysis really look for during when they are analyzing case law data? If you guys have any sense of like what are those popular hypotheses that people test for?
I mean, I won't be able to say this generally, but like in particular, whenever we have worked, it's essentially that it's questions like this, right? Like, how many criminal cases are there before a high court? Like, there is some data on CE courts or whatever, but we don't know. Like, there's no breakdown available anywhere. So I don't know. That's a really difficult question to answer, actually.
Wait, am I understanding correctly? Was your question like what are the potential hypotheses for quantitative? I think the possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
You can look at the background of judges, you can look at the future of judges, you can look at the background of cases, listings, how long does it take for one case to be heard, how long does one hearing last, what is the effect of vacations on productivity of judges. There are immense possibilities. So if only this data was available.
That's the thing. Like, if our courts were willing to share this data with us, like voluntarily, rather than us having to scrape data from whatever little data that we find and then try to make sense of it, it'd be much easier to have like hypothesis in place. But it's that whatever data we find, accordingly we frame our questions, or like it's very rare that the question we started with, like even with this paper, right, we wanted to know what urgent matters are. We don't know, because like the data that is available,
there are some interesting studies recently that are being done by the community on the links between the backgrounds of judges and potential bias in their decisions. So like what social background do they come from? Are you a man? Are you a woman? Does that affect the judgment that you give? And it's all quantitative. So the possibilities are endless.
Got it. Yes, if you guys have any other questions, like feel free to. Okay, Swarnima, yeah, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello, am I audible?
Perfectly, yes.
Great, great. And firstly, thank you so much for the presentation. Tarika and I go a long way back, and it's really nice to see her here doing so well with the numbers. So that's great. I have two questions actually. So last year I was working with COVID-19 policy response. It's a meta-legal research collaborative of 190 plus countries. And we attempted something very similar in terms of analyzing states' response to COVID. And a part of that included understanding the judiciary's response to COVID. So my brief stint with them actually, I had quite a few takeaways, and two questions emanate from that. So the first is that I noticed that around April 2020, when the lockdown was just gaining traction, a lot of transfer petitions were coming up. And I think the Supreme Court was flooded with a lot of them. So I wanted to know if the trend continued and what was its impact on the judicial system in general. And secondly, uh, looking at 1 year of COVID, I just wanted to know that did the Supreme Court or did the judges come up with a certain system where only a set of judges were handling COVID specific cases, because it's a very niche area and we have been dealing with such cases for a long time now. So did you see or notice any pattern where judges were, a certain set of judges were assigned to cases which need technical assistance or technical know-how with regard to COVID? Thank you.
Hi, Swarnima. It's really great to hear from you again after all this time. But unfortunately, I don't have answers to your questions right now. I think because, um, as you said, there were a lot of transfer petitions. It's something that we observed as well with SLPs, that people were attempting to come to the Supreme Court by while different accessing justice through different forums was a difficult challenge. We don't know exactly what happened. Why were some judges trained to answer, like, hear COVID specific questions in particular? Did certain judges focus on certain case types? We really don't know that. There is nothing that we could have observed uh, during this time without actively scraping data and analyzing it with that particular intent. So there is little that we can help you right now with.
I think that's great, because then I think it opens up a new line of research, or probably we can deep dive and understand this a little more, and that just opens gates to
Definitely, they're all important questions.
Yeah. There is one question from Mr. Rama Mohan. There are certain websites like SSC Online and Manupatra that have come up with legal analytics. That is data on judges, a judge preceding case outcomes, number of case adjudged. Have you guys thought of using these data sets also as part of your study?
Yeah, that's actually, yeah. So till now, whenever we have gone about doing a project, we have tried to like get as much data from the source itself, because at the end of the day, we do believe like it's how much ever data they have, it's the Supreme Court website that's the most authentic source of that information, right? So whenever we go about it, we try to stick to the Supreme Court or High Court websites. As we are spanning into more high courts, I mean, we are facing more issues. So we will probably start looking into these other resources. But as of now, we have it. But yeah, that's a very interesting point that we can, like, these are sources that we can go into.
Yeah, and I personally haven't looked at these data sets, but
Yeah.
if they have the right metadata, if they have the right data dictionary, as I've learned over the years, then there is no reason for us to not at least use this data for verification purposes, for checking the validity of our findings. So yeah, I think it's a good exercise for researchers to build up data sets and use each other's studies and research, like
And
data.
host that data set on Justice Hub, right? Like, where else would
Yeah,
you go?
of course.
Yes, of
Yeah,
course.
obviously.
Great. If you guys have any other question, like, please feel free to unmute yourself or put it onto the chat box and we'll take it up. Yeah, Gaurav, please.
Great work, Shreya, Tarika. This is really inspiring. Uh, and I understand all the challenges you have been facing with the coach data, and especially with e-codes and these captchas, etc. I think it's a common issue which we all face, whoever is looking into coach data in India. How do you see the e-codes phase 3 vision document? Do you see some of the gaps you faced while doing this research? Is the phase document, is the vision document trying to address some of those? What are your recommendations on that part?
I haven't really gone through the entire document. Like, I have read parts of it, but I do not have a proper answer to this. But what I can say is that, so from what my understanding of e-codes or what it should be, what my understanding of what it should be is that if you're trying to actually create a platform where you have all data from all high courts or all courts, again there has to be standardization. If there are like 3 courts ka data and all 3 are different, then it does not really help us, right? Like, for example, even if you think like stages, right? So when a case is going through a court, it goes through different stages. So there is like admission stage, there is hearing stage, there is final judgment orders, whatever, right? Even the way in which courts deal with this is different across different hyperts. So for a project that we were working on, like a court, like, okay, I'm not saying these are the actual numbers, but for a court like Rajasthan has like 4 categorizations, whereas another court like Bombay has 40. So even if like that data, even if it's on e-codes, like what do we do with it? Because there is no standardization across codes. And secondly, like again, CAPTCHA, right? Like CAPTCHA, from what I understand, again, we are legal researchers. We depend on somebody else to actually overcome these barriers of like whatever CAPTCHA or whatever other issues they're facing at the stage of scraping. But yeah, from what we understand, it is actually a very big issue. And like, if you actually want this data to be accessible to people, if you actually want researchers like us to, essentially like deal with this data, then this even CAPTCHA needs to go like in some form. Like the website has to be structured more accessible, essentially, like all in all.
And
Yeah.
talking of e-code specifically, till the decentralization at the implementation level is not um, sorted out, I don't know how far this project is going to go, because that's where the problem comes in when you think of decentralization at when it comes to implementing the e-codes process.
Yeah, I do believe they have tried to address this in the vision document. I do not remember the specifics, but I think they have tried to like address this. But again, like, I do not recall the vision document enough to be able to like comprehensively answer this.
Thanks, Shreya. Thanks, Tarika. That's super helpful.
Thank you.
Understood.
Thank you.
If there are any further questions, like, please feel free to raise hand, unmute yourself, and ask your question. Also, we are near time, so so I request all of you to please take like quick 1 minute to fill up this feedback form. We are not asking your name or email ID or anything. We just want to get a very honest sense of like how are you enjoying this session and what are the stuff that you would like to see during Date with Data. If you do want to continue and take this conversation forward with Shreya and Tarika, there is a Discord thread, a channel which you can join and have a conversation with us. We would also be posting all of this content and a summary of this conversation on the Justice Hub forum itself. And I'm posting the link on this chat, and this is something that all of you will get on your email IDs as well. So yeah, just take out time, just take 1 quick minute, fill up the feedback form, and maybe join the Discord channel. And last thing, find everything on the Justice Hub forum itself on the Date with Data thread. And if you have any question, like again, we have, I think, a couple of more minutes. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. All right, I think there are no further questions and we can probably call it a day then. Thank you so much for this session, Tarika and Shreya, taking out time and talking to all of us. I hope all of you who joined us on this Saturday evening really enjoyed the conversation. I certainly did. There will be more events that will keep on coming up. And once again, like a little bit of branding here, but if do consider joining the Discord, subscribe to the Substack channel, which is a bi-weekly newsletter where we post insights around the latest that's happening in data, law, and justice. And also consider following us on Twitter. Yeah, if you have any questions, any thoughts, feel free to put it onto the feedback channel or the Justice Hub forum channel, which I have just posted a link for in the chat box. And on that note, thank you, everyone. We can drop off and close the session. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.